In a world ravaged by war and chaos, a group of survivors must band together to brave the dangers of a post-apocalyptic landscape. The year is 2000, and the world has been plunged into darkness. The nuclear fires have burned out, leaving behind a wasteland of ruins and radiation. But amidst the rubble and despair, a glimmer of hope still remains. Join Dork Day Afternoon as they face off against marauding gangs, enemy soldiers, and even the harsh elements themselves in the world of Twilight 2000. Will our heroes survive the challenges ahead? Can they keep their own humanity intact? Or will they succumb to the harsh realities of life after the end of the world? 2 past midnight. An actual play podcast by Dork Day Afternoon.
Aloha! It's Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing writer Jason McNamara. He is here to promote his latest work, Past Tense. It is an original graphic novel from Dark Horse Comics coming out on June 21st. Jason, welcome to the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. How are you doing today?
I am a pure delight from head to toe. Thank you for having me, Jason.
No, thank you very much for coming on the show, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to interview you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for your time. Your time is just as valuable as mine.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Listeners, I'm just going to go over some of Jason's works. He has worked on numerous graphic novels and at least a couple of video games here and there.
Mm-hmm.
First work he done was is called the Cicada. Is that correct? Cicada?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a bug. It shows
Yes.
up every 13 years as an insect. They're super loud and annoying. That wasn't my first work, though. We did that a few years ago. I did that with Alberto, who I worked with on Past Tense.
Ah, okay, all right. And then you've also written Ghost Band, the Rattler for Image Comics,
Mm-hmm.
the Martian Confederacy series. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, and then also too, correct me if I'm wrong, your first work was Less Than Hero. That was back in 2003, 2004?
That's correct. Yeah, that was a miniseries I self-published.
Ah, okay. And then this year's marks the 20th anniversary.
Sure does. 20 years of comics.
Wow, that's great. And then I'm just going to mention one video game that you work on. You join in, just say, again, rattle off other video games that you worked on. You worked on a video game called Extinction in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
You were the lead writer, and that came out through Maximum Games. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. And I've consulted on a few other games for Maximum Games.
Ah, okay.
But it's been a few years.
And then since 2019, he is an adjunct professor at the Pacific Northwest College of Art, where he teaches introduction and advanced script writing for comics and video games.
That's right.
Jason,
That's pretty good.
do you want to add anything else, or do you want to spotlight any of your past works that our listeners should really check out?
I also have a recent series called Sucker that I do with my friends Tony Talbert and John Hebink and Peter Sakash. So we do that through Kickstarter.
Okay.
I did some earlier books that were all self-published, and I learned a lot by doing it myself. And I think doing things the wrong way teaches you how to do them the right way later.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
you talked about Less Than Hero, which came out 20 years ago. That thing was riddled with typos. I was so confident in my storytelling ability that I sent it to the printer, and Diamond, to their credit, they did distribute it, but I didn't learn possessive pronouns till I was about 30. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, I grew up in public. I grew up very publicly in comics.
And then, correct me if I'll hold off the question till we get to where can people follow you and promote your website. I also want to thank you for an advanced copy of Past Tense. It's a very good story, and listeners, we'll get into that shortly.
You didn't upload it to any torrent sites, did you?
No.
Oh.
All right. Now, where can listeners follow you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Jason McNamara. On Instagram, I'm Ramonsome, because I'm a big Ramones fan. And you can find me on my website, jason-mcnamara.com.
And then for your website, this is where people can pick up some of your past works. Is that correct? From your
Yes,
website
yeah.
store?
I have a store with some low quantity copies, some Kickstarter exclusives, some prints, some stickers, all the good stuff.
That's pretty cool. All right.
I love sending people things in the mail. I love thinking about how they're going to open the box and what's inside. I'm a big fan of like Bright Rags will do these like specialty Halloween t-shirts or Escape from New York packages where you get like an eye patch and a print. And I just love the idea of opening up a box and getting this sort of euphoric feeling, this rush. So I love packaging things up for people, putting little extras in there and just imagining how they open it.
That is so cool.
Yeah. It's more, it's better than like clicking something off of Amazon with this, throw it on your doorstep. You know, I like having that hand touch and that one-to-one exchange with people.
So listeners, if you guys get a chance, please check out Jason's website store. Jason, honestly, because I'm looking at probably picking, I don't know if you have it, the Rattler graphic novel on your
The Rattler graphic novel is sold out. I think I might have one banged up copy on my shelf. That was through Image. It was a beautiful book, and this is gone. You might be able to find one. I can send you a PDF if you want to read it. But Greg and I are looking for a publishing opportunity for that book.
Oh, okay.
So it may be back in print by next year.
Oh, okay. All right. No, I'll be honest with you, Jason. I rather buy it. Make sure you get some of the money from it. If it's not on your website,
Jason, I'm a dozenaire. I have dozens of dollars.
Okay.
I'm set for days.
Okay. I want to give you an extra $1, so at least you have $13.
Yeah. And I'm going to take my wife to the dollar store and I'm going to say, honey, buy any 3 items you want on me. Because I'm a successful comic book writer.
Oh my God, listeners, we're going to have a great time in this interview. We are. All right. Jason, I'm going to ask, what was your first comic, manga, Sunday comics, and I'm also going to throw this into any science fiction or crime novels that you read, your first ones, or.
Okay, so I thought about this. My first memory, one of my very first memories as a toddler, is a Marvel Tales reprint of Amazing Spider-Man 112, and it's got this great image of Spider-Man, like this giant image of him just waving his hands in disgust as like these gangs fight below him.
Yes.
So my father was a young father, and he took me everywhere with him. But we'd always go to the butcher shop, and he would buy Conan magazines and Leg Show and Underage Grannies, whatever he was reading. And then we'd always go to the spinning rack, and I would get Batman and Spider-Man. And in the late 70s, there was that Spider-Man TV show on TV.
Yes.
Where it had like the one web shooter because the other one broke. The Hulk was on TV.
Oh, yes.
The Batman 66 reruns were on TV a lot. And some of those cruder Marvel cartoons were still playing.
Yes.
So my father just always read those to me, taught me how to read with those. And he just really involved me in that sort of mindset. So I remember coming home, I was on his shoulders. I was just a little tyke on his shoulders. And he would say, Jason, don't turn around. Two-Face is following us. And I go, oh no, Two-Face is the worst. And then he would take off running because Two-Face was going to get us. And like my heart's beating out of my chest because Two-Face, he's scary. That guy, you never know what he's going to do. But also it was fun to be chased by Two-Face. So those are my earliest memories of just being a child. So Marvel and DC, but more Marvel has just always been a part of my life, just always. And my relationship with it changes as I get older, and you pop in at different times. But now that I see all these film adaptations, now that Marvel is ubiquitous with entertainment, I just think a lot of comic book people can turn their nose at this or say they're bringing in all these other fans. But like my first interaction with Marvel was that Spider-Man TV show in '78. Like whatever gets you into comics and whatever gets you into the comic book culture, like we are spoiled. We're living in a golden age where the things that we love are now being celebrated.
Yes.
And when I was a kid, like I would rent that Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie.
Oh yes.
That's all we had in 1988.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
And now there's so many adaptations I can't even keep up. If you had told me as a kid that there's a Morbius movie and I've never seen it, I still haven't seen it.
Yeah.
That there's so many comic book adaptations, you can't even watch them all now.
Oh, yes.
Otherwise I would just be on a comic book diet. And I don't think as a comic book writer, you should exclusively live in the comic book.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should have a wide swath of interests because you can't just read comic books and make more comic books. That's a snake eating its own tail.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read those books and I could tell who's been raised on just comic books.
Yeah. All right. And then I'm gonna ask like novels and stuff. Like, do you remember any great science fiction novels that you read?
I remember, so my parents again like would give me what they read. So I remember reading Stephen King really young.
Nice.
I do remember Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Detectives was a book series
Oh, okay.
that I liked quite a bit when I was a kid. Anything that was like a horror anthology, I
Mhm.
remember reading. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I had a book. I mean, I was probably in elementary school, and this was a book about like urban legends, like
Yes.
the vanishing. It was called The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was all about these urban legends, like the hook and the car handle and Lover's
Yes.
Lane. But also, in elementary school, I was reading Anne Rule books. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a nonfiction writer, and she
Yes.
writes about crime killers, like the I-5 killer.
Yeah.
So even though I'm like in sixth grade, I'm reading about like, what happens to a body when you drag it down the stairs and all the carpet, like the flesh it leaves on each step,
Yeah.
which is probably inappropriate. But I loved reading. I
Yeah.
was always exposed to that. In fact, I remember the very first fight I got into, and I was in elementary school, and the Outsiders movie had come out.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
had seen the Outsiders movie, and I thought, well, I want to read the book now.
Yes.
So we were all little kids, and I'm in line to get on my bus, and this kid said, "Oh, look at you reading the book. Your mommy won't let you watch the movie." And I remember like being like, "You don't understand. The book has got more to it."
Yeah.
And he was like, he won't. And I remember punching him in the face. I remember like getting in trouble. And I remember like the blood coming out. He's a little redheaded kid named Ryan. I punched him in the face, and then the teachers break us up, and I got to go pick up my copy of The Outsiders off the sidewalk. And that was the first fight I got into. Some kid picked on me for reading. I don't know where you are today, Ryan, but I'll still do a rematch. I don't know where you are. Come get me, Ryan. The books are always better, creep.
Yeah. Yes, they are. And when did you decide you wanted to be a writer?
Jason, I don't even know if I don't know that I ever had a choice.
Okay.
I love to read and I love to write, and I don't know that it took a long time for me to put those two together as like you should be a writer. But I would fill notebooks up with observations, song lyrics, poetry, little short stories, little fan fiction. I wrote like a little novella when I was in probably high school, and I just thought this was great, and I gave it to some friends, and they were like, this is suspiciously like Albert Camus' The Stranger. So early on, you're really aping your influences until you find your own legs, until you're on your own 2 feet. So I understand why people start with fan fiction. I don't knock fan fiction at all. It teaches you how to write, and then you get that out of the way, and you can do your own stuff. My first comic book series, Less Than Hero, was very, very much in the vein of like Silver Age superheroes with the Steve Ditko look, but with modern scuzzy aesthetics, like the superhero smokes meth to find his powers. And we thought that was edgy. And at the time, it was the best we could do at the time. And we were aping our influences because we loved that kind of comic. And once we got that out of our way, we were like, oh, now let's tell our own kind of stories.
Yes.
That's more unique to us.
So before I ask you the next question, because like you said, your first comic book was Less Than Hero. So so the title, is it a riff from the 1980s movie Less Than Zero? And that was also based on a book too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was absolutely a riff on that. What was his name? He wrote American Psycho as well. His name is Bret Easton Ellis, I think is his name.
I don't. Okay.
I didn't read the book. I was familiar with the movie, and yeah, it was a riff on that. I just thought it was a pun. And then shortly after we did that, there was a band called Less Than Hero. All of a sudden, Less Than Hero is everywhere. And actually, it was really funny. That Will Smith movie, Hancock, at one point was going to be called Less Than Hero. And we contacted our entertainment lawyer when I read that. I was like, hey, they're making a movie called Less Than Hero about a superhero, but it's not our book.
Yeah.
And he said, you know what he said? Let them make it, and then we'll sue them later. And at some point, they must have Googled the title and changed it. Because I was like, oh, I'm going to get some of that Will Smith money. Never happened. Thanks a lot. So I never saw Hancock because I was mad.
Yeah,
I was mad they stole my title, and then I was mad they gave it away.
yeah. Darn that researcher, that apprentice researcher kid, right?
There was also, I think a top shelf book came out almost the same time called Less Than Heroes. They made
Oh,
it plural, and I was like, it was just in the ether.
yeah.
So
All right. And then, how did you feel seeing your name for the first time, on your first published comic, Less Than Hero? How did you feel?
well, it's a mix, right? You're like, I did this.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think the trap with comic books or seeing your name on anything is it inflates your ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, my name was on that book. It's also riddled with typos
Mm-hmm.
that are wholly mine. So on one hand, I'm like deeply proud of the work and that we're saying something unique about San Francisco in that time period. And also, I think it was like the collaboration between Tony and I. We were like this little garage band.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were against the world. So we were hand selling that thing in bars.
Mm-hmm.
One of the very first copies I sold was over a urinal at this bar called the Eagle. It's a gay bar in San Francisco. I got my backpack on. I'm going to the bathroom. This other guy's going to the bathroom. And he's like, hey, how'd you do that comic book? You got any? And I was like, oh, well, yeah. Let me just wash my hands and I'll hand sell you a copy while you're urinating.
Yeah.
I had no pride. Like, hey, I'll sell a copy to anybody.
Yeah.
So we would sell it in bars. I would host art shows and have different kind of artists. And I always made sure that we were the only comic book in the room. And we were always the cheapest thing in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't afford like $1,000 painting, maybe you would enjoy this $3 comic book.
Yeah.
So I love that it really made Tony and I a team, and it really just cemented us as like collaborators, and it taught me how to be a good collaborator and how to support my collaborators. And I just thought I remember Tony and I, we did the first issue and we were in a bar. We always had our company meetings in bars and usually descended into a wrestling match on the floor. But I remember, Tony, this book is so good that you and I will be working on Spider-Man in 6 months. I promise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been 20 years, and I'm sorry, Tony. It never quite happened.
It might 6 months from now, right? You'll get a call from Marvel. Hey, we need to do a one shot. What's the event? They're doing that some death of a friend, and someone dies in the Spider-Man issue. They're going to drag it out. And yes, comic book fans, I'm just making fun because
death of anything. Come on. Is there another gimmick we can use besides the death of this person when they have a movie coming out in a year and they're not going to let that slide? I just roll my eyes and it just washes over me.
Oh yeah.
I'm not reading the death of or big event comic books. I still love corporate comic books. I still read, but I avoid the marketing comics.
Mm-hmm. But I'm going to say, watch Marvel 6 months from now, quote unquote, 6 months from now, you'll get a call from them and go, hey, you have an artist you want to work with? We have this Spider-Man one shot,
Well, I don't think anyone starts off with Spider-Man. They'll put me on like a Speedball or something.
Yeah.
They'll put me on some forgotten thing. I wouldn't say no to the work, but also I love storytelling. And if it's for Marvel, if it's for me, if it's for anyone, I love telling stories. And the metric of success 20 years ago, I thought that's the goal. We got to do Spider-Man. And now I'm like, you know what? I'm happy doing my own thing. If Marvel and DC never calls, that's okay. I'm a success. I get to tell my stories the way I want to. Dark Horse was very, very supportive and a great home for past tense and a great working experience. And I'm telling the stories I want to tell. I have no complaints whatsoever.
And that is going to be the perfect segue before we get into past tense. I want to read a quote from Rob. Now, Rob, I'm going to butcher your name very badly. Caprilozzi from comicsmonsters.com. Now, I know he probably quoted in one of your past works, but I love this quote because to me it fits. Because Jason, I'm sorry, but past tense is the first work. I know you've been around. Yeah, remember?
I know. I'm not a household name, and you're forgiven for not knowing. It's okay.
But I love the quote that Rob gave. McNamara crafts a solid story with many intricate layers. And I agree, because we're going to start going into past tense. For listeners, Can you tell listeners what is the story about?
Past Tense is about a camera operator named Ashley, and she works at a company called Past Tense. And what they do is they send camera drones into the past to view historical events, not to change history, but to watch them as they actually occurred. And she discovers something in the past that threatens her in the present. Without giving too much away. So there is a threat in the past, there's a threat in the present, and there's actually something in the future, and it's all going to collide in the climax of this story. And it's also about our sort of loss of privacy and technology, and how with all these technological advances, the most vulnerable among us become exploited. But I put that in a slasher book. It is a thriller that hopefully gives you something to think about when it's over.
It really is. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit because I want to say what I love about this story. It kind of sort of reminds me of the classic movie Total Recall, Brainstorm, Strange Days, that deals with memories. Kind of that vibe. Not exactly how it is. But the other thing I always loved about Total Recall and Strange Days too was that even though they had this thing that dealt with memories, is kind of set in the future, but it also dealt with today's problems too as well. And it's not we're not looking like at Blade Runner. We're talking about where it's the world looks a little different, but it still feels real. And like
that was important to us. We didn't want it to feel like the Jetsons are so far removed. So I was like Escape from New York. I think it was that only takes place like 15 or 17 years after it was made. It's the near future. It's right around the corner. If the world looks so different, then there's no emotional connection to it.
And the other thing I loved about, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Past Tense companies. The other thing, the world that you created, it again, like you said, you want to make sure it's real, people can recognize it, because you don't, and it's you kind of point out what would happen in the future, like population explosion, the housing situation. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I love how Ashley and her friend shares literally a storage studio. And I'm not going to say
it's a storage room pretty much.
Yes.
And they've got to share it, and they're lucky to have it.
Yes. And then also too, and I'm going to start talking about the company too, is that Past Tense, there's also ethical, and you deal with a little bit of the ethical and legal issues too as well. And you describe it, and well, not to get into spoilers, but you describe it very early on in the first 2 pages.
I'm going to get that out of the way.
And it sets up everything. And
oh, thank you, my friend. I worry about exposition. I don't want to put too many words on the page, but you've got to acclimate people and answer a lot of questions they might have up front.
Yes.
Like, what is the technology? How does it work? How does it work in the framework of the legal system? And then you drop it in. And you have to do all of this through a point of view character that you can empathize with, which is why we created Ashley. So there's a lot of big ideas in Past Tense, but they're meaningless unless you feel for the people moving through these mechanisms. So I didn't want Ashley to be like a Reed Richards type or some sort of super genius scientist. She's just a worker. She might as well be like a barista or a bartender. Like it's a service job. So even though there's a lot of money going on and there's this fantastic element of putting cameras to the past, she's just trying to keep a roof over her head. She's hustling. She's looking for fresh angles to do under the table deals. So in this world, one of the best things that you can find as a camera operator is finding an exclusive, finding a historical event that no one else has even heard of.
Yes.
And I think I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and a lot of them will cover the same material. And I ask myself, are we running out of true crime to look at? Like, there surely must have been events that we don't even know happened. For example, the Bay Area rapist, or the Golden State rapist, it took decades for people to realize that he was the same person who committed these crimes in Northern California and Southern California. Like, it took forever for them to link them. So I think there must be hundreds of other events out there that we'll never even know about.
Yes.
So putting it in the framework of this world, of course, if you could put a camera through time, you might want to like reinforce your religious beliefs. You may want to see the Big Bang. There's so many wonderful secrets in history that we could explore. But in this book, guys are just using this service to peep on women in the past. They're just looking for the most salacious events they could find, or horrific events like the Black Dahlia's murder,
Yes.
the Son of Sam, who was Jack the Ripper, who was the Zodiac killer. It's not to enlighten, it's to titillate. Because every time I see a technological advance in the real world, I see guys using it to creep on women.
Yes.
And I think this is why we can't have nice things. Apple comes out with the AirPods so you can track your luggage, but guys are then dropping them in women's purses so they can follow them home and find out where they live.
Mm-hmm.
So it's with every technological advance, there's an immediate abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to play with that. It's not. This book is not going to make you feel better about humanity. Sorry to say. Maybe the human spirit, but not humanity at large.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. And that's the thing I wanted to comment. Going back to the that people who pay, basically will pay money, and even though they come to Ashley going, well, I want to see, I want to watch the Big Bang. I want to see, like you said, I want to see, the crucifixion. She probably has a small portion of those, but most of her clients who can pay will go, I want to see, who murdered the Black Dahlia, and I want to see how it was done.
Yeah.
And it's more of it's just, to me, what I really love about the story is that it comments on how some of us are voyeuristic. Like you said, how every advanced technology, we can use it for good, but sometimes we also use it for the wrong reason.
Right. And so I was also thinking, like, if you want to look up someone that you remember from high school or 20 years ago, or an ex, you could just put their name in Facebook and see everything about them. You can immediately just like drop in on their lives, look around, and leave again.
Yeah.
So I thought, how do you push that to the 9th degree? Now you can put a camera 50 years in the past and put a camera right in their face. And there are times in my life where I think I'm alone, and I'm like, am I alone?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like someone's looking at me.
Yeah.
So then, am I entertainment for someone 50 years in the future? Or 100 years in the future? I could be.
Yeah. Because
I'm not very entertaining. I don't know. I think they'll stop watching pretty quick, but so that's sort of voyeurism, and we do look at that, and I do at some point ask the reader, are we voyeuristic now by reading this?
Yes.
I want to ask, like, when do we look away?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good, that's true. That really is.
Yeah.
Because just because we see something on, let's say, whether it's Twitter, someone is catching something in a fight, and I'll give you a very good example, because I saw on a very prominent news website, they were showing a videotape of a fight at Disneyland, the whole fight, and I'm watching this whole thing. The clip is like about a minute and a half. But you're right. It's like, when do I stop to turn this off? Because this is really bad. But yet it's like, oh my God, look at this,
Yeah, it can be an addiction, and sometimes we're just watching the mundaneness of someone else's life.
Reality TV show.
Yeah, and I think a lot about how much am I not getting done because my attention is being divided by these things that aren't really giving me any nutrient, and also, am I contributing to like non-ethical true crime by consuming so much?
Yes.
At what point am I contributing to the exploitation of people's pain?
Yes.
And I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to make it seem like Past Tense is a message book. It's about Ashley surviving in this world. But I think good science fiction should ask you, and good horror should say something about the time it was made in.
Yes.
I think of Jaws as the great example of that. Jaws is saying something about the world at that time. Even though they never go to New York City, Brody was a New York City cop. And New York City was in a really rough spot. Yes. So he moved his family to Amity to keep them safe. And surprise, surprise, the shark is not going to let his family be safe. And he's got to confront his fear. And he never looks at the camera and says, no, I'm going to confront my fear. But there's a strong theme that holds it all together. So even though it's an adventurous, probably the greatest film ever made, right?
Yes.
It still gives you something to think about at the end. And I think good sci-fi should do that. Good horror should do that.
Yes.
These stories are written in a time and place. They're written now.
Yes.
And in 10 years, this story might be passé.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, it would have had no relevance to the world that we live in.
And you're right. I'm sorry. I don't mean to keep focusing on, the message, because you're right. It's not, it's not about you're trying to say a message, because you're telling a very good story. You're telling a very good story, a very good
That we don't want to spoil.
yes,
This is a thriller kind of
it's
mystery, and there are twists and turns, and you and I are both talking around a lot of that because you don't want to spoil it for anybody.
yes. But I think the thing I love about this book, Jason, is there's layers to it. And the other thing is it's a very good story, but it has layers to it, and I love it. That's the thing I really love about it.
Thank you, my friend.
We
worked hard.
Let's see. I am going to ask you, when you decide to put this, correct me if I'm wrong, the story is set in 2038, is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
I
went through a couple different versions. I think I landed on 2038 in the end.
Okay, right. Because again, I love the world that Ashley lives in. I recognize it, and and we've already talked about some of the issues that are still being addressed in the future. I'm just asking, did you have kind of an outline what the world was going to be at that time, or some type of Bible, or?
For me personally, I find story Bibles are constraining. I think if you could do that later.
Okay.
But you lose a lot of the exploration and discovery with a story Bible because you're locked into a framework. And I'm a lot looser than that. So I had the idea of the mechanism first. We're going to send cameras to the past because I'm always listening to true podcasts or reading historical events. And just a well-placed video camera could solve so many questions.
Yes.
Right. So I thought, I don't want to change history. I just want to know the truth. Will I ever know the truth? There was a killer on Long Island. He's still there, the Long Island serial killer. And at one point, he was almost caught on camera. And they have no idea who he is to this day. And he just was just off camera at one point. And I thought, if we could have turned that camera an inch, we could have solved 7 murders.
Yeah.
So that was the idea. And then I played with the idea, and I built up the world, and how could this work, and how do we solve these problems? But in and of itself, a story Bible isn't a story, and the idea isn't a story. So you have to find a character, and you have to find somebody with a want and a need within that world. So how do those things contrast and support each other? So I came up with the idea first, and a rough idea of like how that world would work, what is the thread, and then you write a character who can live in that world. And then that changes the ideas and the story and the plot. So I write a full outline, and I make sure that that works from beginning to end. It's like 1.5 pages, 2 pages. And that goes to Brett Israel, our wonderful editor. And he says, yeah, this looks good. Let's do this. Maybe think of this. Don't forget to humanize the main character. And I was like, yeah, you got it. So then I write a full script, and I write dialogue, but it's really kind of placeholder dialogue. Because in the act of writing the script, you discover more about the character, and you discover more about the world, and maybe you change something that was different in the outline. Yeah. So you're always discovering things and tweaking things and moving things around a little bit. So like you mentioned the year changed. Sometimes it was 2043, sometimes it was 2039. I landed on 2038 because I want the future to feel just around the corner. Yes. And also when we flash back to the past, it's the world that we've lived through. So when Ashley looks at her own family history, it's the 70s, it's the 90s, it's the early aughts. It's times that we were like, oh yeah, I was just off camera. I was in that world somewhere. And I feel like that's the tough part with the story that is fantastical, is where are we in this story? Is there an entry point for us? Is there a human element that we can latch? So I go back and forth, and even after the art is delivered, I'm still tweaking dialogue and changing a lot of dialogue. Yeah. Because I've discovered something in Alberto's artwork. Alberto is so gifted with facial grammar and body language that then I could change the dialogue and take advantage of that, or remove dialogue because he is telling the story so well without my words. So then I take a final pass, and I'm still tweaking things, which can drive an editor crazy. If I want to give a shout out to anybody, it's the proofreader at Dark Horse. Because you can run your document through a Google check or a spell check, but then I'm rewriting dialogue on the page. So my hat really goes off to the Dark Horse proofreader, who then has to go through all the pages and check my typos on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, a tough job. But the luxury, part of the beautiful thing of having the support of Dark Horse is that there's a proofreader, that there's an editor, that there's a design team that goes in and does all that beautiful interior work on the book.
Yes.
It was a very posh experience.
I want to go back to the character Ashley, because like you said, that basically she's a worker. And I want to comment, in the first 2 pages, I fell in love with Ashley because she's just because at first you see her, she's doing this, I'm your trauma analysis. Okay, I'm going to show you this thing that happened privately with, President, John F. Kennedy, and that's it. And then you hear, and then she starts talking about, this is one of the jobs I could find, I can't use my sociology degree, because she's like pretty much everyone, a lot of
recent college graduates.
Yeah, it's, they either pick, right, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it's still true, but like I think like the top 2 or 3 majors is always sociology or psychology.
Yes.
2 of the degrees that you really can't do anything with, unless you go for your master's and your doctorates, then,
Yeah, so when this technology came out, overnight, her sociology degree finally became in demand. So she had this useless degree, probably debt, financially challenged in this overcrowded world. And then this is just a job. Yes. Her heart's not in it. And she's got to deal with people that she probably doesn't really like. And if you've ever had a customer service job, you have your front face, your customer face.
Yes.
But you have this internal dialogue where you're like, oh God, this person again, please leave. Why?
Yes.
So I wanted it to be relatable because we've all had those kind of jobs. Again, I didn't want her to be some sort of egghead scientist dealing with things that the majority of us don't. The most of us have had a customer service job.
Yes.
It should be required for all Americans to work in customer service.
Yes.
So we would have a lot more empathy for one another and patience. Yes. So I wanted her to feel relatable and human. So even though she's got this sort of exterior bravado, it's almost like this thing that she was created to get through the world. The world's overcrowded. She's constantly being sexualized, has no privacy.
Yes.
So she's got to be strong. But internally, she is, she has a great relationship with her grandmother. There is some trauma in her background, in her family, that she's also looking into. It's the same way that it's very common now for people to do Ancestry.com, to look back and see their ancestry, to see where they come from. Ashley can use her company credits to put a camera through her own past to see where things went wrong in her own family up to a certain degree. And then, of course, her past and this killer's past intersect in a way that's surprising, that creates a domino effect that puts her in danger in the present without giving too much away.
Yes. And the other thing, I don't want to give, again, I'm not giving too much, because the other thing with past tense too is not only you want to see that exclusive, oh, guess what they did behind closed doors, now we can see what they did.
Yeah.
Or some type of higher calling of, yes, I want to see when Rome was built or something. But for Ashley, she uses past tense to not only look where she came from, but almost like relive all her painful memories.
Her family's memories,
and it's very heartbreaking, And
there's a heartbreaking scene in the book that we struggled with, but I put it in there because it was actually something that did happen to my own mother. My own mother has passed now, but she had always told me this story about something her grandfather had did, and it's pretty horrific. And I'm a dog lover, and this was a tough scene to put in there. And when I would show the script to my friends, they would be like, why did you have to do that? I'm like, because it's actually really happened. And actually, it was even much worse in real life. I had to trim it down and simplify it for the book. So yeah, she's looking at her own history and wondering where her family went wrong. And that's a big part of the book. And she's also doing these exclusives under the table from her employer to get extra money to get her grandmother into a better living situation. So she's got a good cause for some of the underhanded things that she's doing at work. She's not your traditional hero. She's a survivor, which I think we can all empathize with in this world that we're all living in right now.
there is one. I'm sorry, I forgot to write
Mhm.
down. There was one character because after I sent you the questions, I was able to finish reading the rest of the story, which I think is great. But I love because there's that one character, the that kind of like the housing authority or housing and health agent or something,
Habitat, yeah,
you know.
yeah. He's the helpful guy.
Yes, he's that kind of that knight in shining armor. We're not. I don't
Mhm.
want to say too much about him, but it was like this is so. He's a real nice guy. He's a stand-up guy.
He's the only guy in this story that doesn't want anything from Ashley.
Yes, and he
Mhm.
just wants to help her out of literally just help her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, hopefully, I mean, I had someone like that in my own life
Mhm.
when I was a teenager, someone that just gave me a leg up and saw me and wanted to do just help me escape my situation, help me improve my life,
Mhm.
just altruistic. And
Yes.
now that I'm a teacher, I see kids where I'm like, you just need someone to listen. Like, you need just a little bit of direction can get you out of this sort of like mental log jam that you're in.
Yeah.
So I don't have kids of my own. So teaching has been it's been a great outlet for me to sort of impart the modicum of knowledge that I've amassed in my life to
Mhm.
help solve someone else's problems. And then I do, a little mentoring with other comic book creators, younger comic book creators, and try and alleviate some of the mental stress of this game.
Mhm.
I want people to make all new mistakes, but don't make the mistakes that I
Mhm.
made.
No, but
So
thank you.
that character was also, but she doesn't trust him in the beginning.
Yes.
You
Oh,
don't
yes.
know that he's altruistic. He could be another creep. You never
Yes.
know.
Mhm. Jason, thank you very much for answering that question. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Of course.
All right. I'm going to move on. So, how did you team up with Dark Horse?
Mm, luck, 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 luck. I was introduced to my editor Brett by another creator that he had worked with. He was a friend of mine, and he was like, you and Brett would hit it off. I think you and Brett have the same sensibilities. I'm going to arrange an introduction. So I met Brett, and I said, hey, I've got a couple of ideas I'm working on. Can I send them over? And he was like, sure. So I sent over 3 ideas, 3 pitches, which I highly recommend to any creators out there. If you ever get the chance to talk to an editor, a producer, any sort of anyone between you and your goals, if you have the opportunity, don't give them one pitch, give them 3. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they don't like the one, you might never be in that room again. You might never be in that conversation again.
Mm-hmm.
So give them 3 to choose from. It's called the elevator pitch, right? If you're in an elevator with Steven Spielberg, can you give him your pitch before you get to the next floor? If it's a 3-floor ride, give him 3 pitches. Maybe he'll
Mm-hmm.
like one of them. So Brett liked one of them, and he asked me to write it up, and I did. And it just worked. So from there, we got the contract, and then we had a discussion about who's going to draw the book. And I had a great experience working with Alberto on the Cicada. And I thought, wouldn't it be great for him and I to have a project at Dark Horse and just have that experience? The experience in the Cicada was rough.
Mm-hmm.
And through that roughness, he and I bonded. He and I and the colorist, Paul Little, who's just a fantastic colorist and a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 of us really bonded. So when it came time for me to have like an easy project, quote
Yes.
unquote, I wanted to bring them on board and be like, hey, I owe you guys a good project. I owe you guys a project that's going to stay on track. And I'm glad I did. And through that, Alberto and I have just bonded, and Paul. So the 3 of us will continue to work together in some fashion. We just clicked really well, and that's a hard thing to find in comics.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
People that you click with. It's all about the collaboration. Um, money is an issue. We have to pay them.
Mm-hmm.
So funding, you always have to be creative with funding when you're an indie creator. So we had obviously the support of Dark Horse on this book. So whatever happens next is really going to be dictated by who I can trick into giving us money to pay Peter and Alberto,
Mm-hmm.
or Paul rather, Paul Little and Alberto.
Since you mentioned Cicada, you and Alberto and Paul have worked on that. In this book, in past tense, I think it was like the either 5th or 6th page. Whose idea was it to put the cicada killers in 1993 in the background?
So the exterior of past tense has like a marquee, like a movie theater marquee,
Yes.
where there's different things that you can see, right? All these different like horrific things that you could like to choose for you. Like, oh, I'd love to see the Black Dahlia's murder, or I'd love to see this. So I did all the photoshopping and I put all those titles in
Yes.
myself. And I just thought, well, that would be a nice nod to the cicada. let's keep it in universe. Maybe this is the same world.
Yeah.
And because Alberto drew that, it's the Alberto verse, you know? I'm glad that you caught that. I don't know anyone else is going to catch that, but we'll get back to the cicada. Alberto and I, we have plans to get back to that, and we'll probably self-publish that through Kickstarter.
Okay.
And then more and more. I just love that team. And the more you work with someone, the more you get to know each other and trust each other, and you just bring out the best. And Alberto's art is just, he gets better every page. I just love getting work from him. I would love to do a book with him that is more silent and more just relying on him to tell the story. Typically, I'm a minimalist where I don't put a lot of dialogue in the books, but because this is a sci-fi book, and there's an interior and an exterior monologue.
Yes.
The dialogue, there's a lot of words in this book. There's more words usually than I would use in a comic. And when I was plotting it out, I found some space at the end of the second act where I had been really conservative with my scenes. They were shorter than I thought they were going to be. So I had like 4 to 5 pages at the end. I'm like, oh, I'm going to give Alberto an action sequence.
Yes.
Yeah. And I opened it up, and they are the best pages in the book. Yes. I wrote that for him so he could cut loose. There's hardly any dialogue on it. I just wanted him to have a spot to shine, you know? If you're in a band, you got to give the drummer a drum solo. And I wanted to just give him a big runway spot just to be all him. And of course, I think the best page of the book is from that sequence. And in the back of the book, we have a process page of like we show how we did it. And that's the page that everyone loved and chose. Okay. You got to trust your artist.
I'm just asking, was this intended to be an original graphic novel or a mini series?
I get that question a lot because the book is broken into 4 chapters, so it almost seems like a mini series that has been collected, but it is. I write a very specific way, and I write in a 3-act structure. And almost all of my graphic novels, Ghost Band, The Rattler, The March Confederacy, Continuity, First Moon, even Less Than Hero, they're all 96 pages. And every act is 24 pages. So the first act is 24 pages, Act 2A is 24, 2B is 24, and Act 3 is 24. And then when I submit it to a publisher, I give them the option. You could do this as a miniseries or a graphic novel. Yeah. It's not going to change how I write it at all. So if you tore the book into 4ths, you would have 4 issues. And that pretty much goes for any of my books. I let them decide. But financially, a miniseries is a much greater financial gamble for the publisher. And if you're not someone who puts asses in seats, right? If you're Brian K. Vaughan, you do the miniseries because people are going to show up for Brian K. Vaughan. Yes. Or Donnie Cates. But as you mentioned, I've been around for 20 years and you'd never heard of me. So my name alone is not going to get you to pick up a book. But a good strong concept like Past Tense probably will. So Dark Horse said, we'll do this as a graphic novel. And personally, I love graphic novels. I think you could probably get a bigger audience with a miniseries. But if you're lucky enough to create tension and a mood in a comic book of horror is really hard to create in comics. So if you took a month between each chapter of this book, you might not be able to follow it. I've got to reestablish that dread, that sort of tension in the background. I'd rather hold it and do it as a graphic novel. And that's how I read The Walking Dead. I loved reading the Walking Dead collections because you got one big chunk of dread. But if I had to piece it out month by month, it's hard to reestablish that. Yes. So, but I did ask Dark Horse if we could do chapter breaks, and they were really supportive of that because the book is dark. It is, it's got some heavy themes going on, and I want to just have a chapter break, give you a chance to reset, show you an image that's about to happen in the chapter to sort of get you ready for that because we're playing with the asynchronicity of time, and then drop you back into it. So maybe you want to put it down, get a glass of water, pet a dog, and then come back. Yes. Yeah.
But I'm going to say this works perfectly as a graphic novel because, like you said, you want to hold that mood, you want to hold that tension,
hold that moment. Yeah. Superhero comics are easy, right? They punch someone in the mouth. You can get into that. Action's easy. Comedy is easy to get back into it. But horror and dread and this sort of mood and tension in a comic book is harder to create. And if you're lucky enough to hold it, I don't want to let you go. And just as a consumer, I prefer graphic novels. I see all your long boxes behind you. I sold all my collection a couple moves ago. I'm like, I can't be a museum for comic books anymore.
Yeah.
Some lucky guy on Craigslist got 24 long boxes for $500. With the caveat, I'm not moving anything. Like, you bring a friend, you load all this up.
Someone answered and go, I'm there, man.
Yeah, and then of course after they take the boxes, I realized, oh, I had the first appearance of Harley Quinn in there. Oh, I had the first Carnage in there. Oh, I had a bunch of Jim Lee X-Men in there. Oh, I had a bunch of Todd McFarlane Spider-Man in there. Oh well, it's just money.
Yeah.
Money would ruin me.
I was gonna ask you an off-the-cuff question, like, did you cherry pick before you sold it? Okay.
I did. I took all my like the death of Gwen Stacy. I took out the first appearance of the Punisher. I took out my my Ditko Spider-Man, and those I put on eBay. I paid my rent for months. Yeah, I think I got $1,000 on eBay for that first Punisher.
Ah, but still, that's.
I was really into collecting, and now I'm a minimalist. I don't want to own things. Yes. I want to keep it real simple. I was at a different place in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought my collection was overwhelming me.
To
anyone with a big collection, sell it piece by piece. I was just like, I want it out of the house. It was time to move again. I was like, I didn't want to move all these boxes. I had them in storage spaces. I drove them up in a van.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably paid more in gas in moving them than I got for them in the end.
Yeah.
So I just got frustrated and started fresh.
Well, and comic fans, I'm going to say this: do not be offended, because I'm going to say, before I got married, I was living in a duplex. Rent was pretty good. I had tons of comics. Yeah. Tons. But my wife's going, you're not bringing all this here. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. Cherry pick. And I'm going to say, let's be honest, probably only maybe 5% will probably be worth something. 95% is dollar bin stuff.
Yeah, if you're lucky. Yeah.
And then they'll drop this. And then sometimes you'll hear that one issue that'll spike in price. Our DC Comics number 87, when they introduced Superboy Prime, shoots up to $100 because when the Infinite Crisis came out, he became the villain. I'm going, I sold that for maybe 50 cents.
Yeah, you never know.
I know.
I feel like you should collect for the joy of it, and if you're trying to make money, buy stocks.
Yeah. But it's always funny. It's like, oh man, I had that. But then
it's impossible to predict, and if it brings you joy, awesome. And I sold those comic books, the guy who bought them was so happy. And I was like, if it brings you joy, go for it.
Oh yeah. But then also too, the other what, 20 or 30 issues of DC Comics Presents with probably less than 10 cents a piece, So
yeah, but and again, like, am I really going to go back and reread those?
Yeah.
No, I rarely read anything twice. It's the rare comic book that I'll have a collection of that I'll pick up every now and then and just marvel at what they've done. Oh, yeah. Brubaker, like I'll buy Brubaker collections. I think he's a really great writer and voice. But again, I read his work and I think I don't want to write like this, but I really love someone who only he could write those books the way he writes them.
Yes.
And I think that's the strength of a good writer, is that you find your voice and only you could tell that story that way. Whereas a lot of books could be written by anybody.
Yes. You've already gave a couple shout outs to Alberto and Paul. Do you want to give us any more shout outs? I know you gave a shout out to whoever was the proofreader at Dark Horse.
We had a great editor. Everyone at Dark Horse was editor, just... I'm in Portland and they're not far. I've never been to their offices, but I have great conversations with them. They're supportive. They love comic books. My editor was really supportive of me telling this story the way that we wanted to. Minimal notes, and they were good notes that we changed. And for me, I worked at a comic book store when I got out of high school. So like 1994, I was working in 94, 95, I was working in comic book shops. And I remember putting those Dark Horse Legends, it was like a line on the shelf with like Mike Mignola doing Hellboy, Frank Miller doing Sin City, Concrete was another one.
Yes.
John Byrne was doing Next Men, I think it was. And just they were heavy. They were like cardstock that they just felt substantial books.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there were not a lot of comic books was in the doldrums, I would say.
Yeah.
There was a lot of variant covers. Marvel was about to go bankrupt. The Clone Saga was driving me away from Spider-Man. Really, you had James Robinson on Starman, and you had Jim Ostrander on The Spectre, and those were like adult comic books
Yes.
that I just loved to bits. And then the Dark Horse books, I was like, these are great books. These
Mm-hmm.
are light in the dark at a time when comic books are not great. So I'd always had like a really soft spot for Dark Horse. I had a soft spot for Image, and it was the same thing. It was just meant like the world to me to be published by Image, and
Mm-hmm.
it means the world to me to have Dark Horse. You know, Dark Horse is very selective in what they do, and you know, to have that entity say this book is good enough to have our logo on it,
Mm-hmm.
like that makes me feel like a millionaire, because I grew up with these things and it means something to me. So yeah, I couldn't be happier. So you know, this could be you never know. Every book could be your last. If this is my last book, I'm going out on top.
Mm-hmm. Sonia Harris, the logo design.
Mm-hmm.
I love. Sorry, this is kind of enough off the cuff thing I just added in this morning was I love the logo design because it kind of remind me kind of somewhat to a video game titles. You know,
Right?
I kind of love it. Yeah. So
Interesting.
did when like how did that come about, or did
Sonia's an old friend, and she has done a lot of like logo design over the years, especially for like Image books. And I just trust her. I also think you want to work with people that have a different perspective than you and a different life experience than you. And I didn't want, you know, if I could not just have it be like four boys making a book about a woman, sort of bring in another pair of eyes to sort of soften me and to look at what I might miss. And so anytime I work with Sonia or someone who's doing design work, I always do some mock-ups first, like I'm thinking something like this, or I'm thinking something like that.
Oh.
And then she comes in and goes, oh yeah, those are terrible. You should do this. And I go, oh, thank God you're right. You know what I mean? So I get my bad ideas, my trite ideas out of the way. And she comes in and I mean, I wish I had deeper pockets. I would hire her all the time. But she's just generous with her vision. She's done a couple logos for me over the years. So we had an idea of how the cover specifically, you want people to see that cover and not necessarily know what the plot is, but have an idea about how to feel about the work. Covers are their own art. Covers don't have to tell the truth. Covers have to give you a sensation. So if you're looking for a romantic period piece, you know past tense is not your book from that cover, from the treatment that Sonia did. So she did the logo, which is probably one of the first things we did for the book. And then she took Alberto and I worked on the cover, came up with an image that we thought was striking. He did probably a dozen different iterations. We put them in the back of the book because they were so good. Any one of them would have been a great cover. We landed on this one. He drew it up. Paul did his great coloring work on it. And then we gave it to Sonia to add almost like a text, like a video texture to it. So we feel like we are invading Ashley's privacy as we look at that cover. We are being voyeuristic on that cover, and Ashley knows that you're watching. So there is, I can see it on my shelf. There's a Patricia Highsmith book. I think it's in A Dog's Ransom. She's an author that I love. And she mentions at one point in the book that if you're stalking your prey, you never look them in the eye because one eye attracts another. So in the cover, I really want to have the eyes facing out. So if you're in a comic book store, your eyes are going to look at another set of eyes. It's going to catch your attention, I hope. And you'll know if that book's for you just on that cover image or not.
That's pretty cool.
To me, that's a successful cover. Yeah.
Are there any future projects that you can talk about right now?
Yeah, I can tell you nothing. So I had a Kickstarter that is running late, and it's for Ghostband. And I finally have all the art for Ghostband, and it's lettered. And now I'm saving the money so I can send it to the printer. And then the rest of my year is going to be shipping that book out to the backers and paying Paul Little, the colorist. I owe him some money for that. So I don't want to take on anything. I don't have anything on my plate except delivering for my Kickstarter backers for Ghostband. And then next year we'll start from scratch and we'll see where we're at next year. But no, there's nothing in the pipeline. I want to unburden myself. I want to just focus on getting Ghostband out, get the backers, and then I would love to be at zero and have nothing on my plate. I think that would be a good feeling.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Marvel, DC, don't come knocking. Don't you dare offer me a job. I want to drive Lyft for the rest of the year.
All right, Jason. I'm slowly wrapping things up. I know this is an audio podcast. I see that you're wearing a Halloween, from the original movie Halloween back in 1978. You have I want to say in the background, is it a Halloween 3 lunchbox? And you also have
this is a Marvel superheroes lunchbox.
Marvel?
I do have these are Halloween tiki mugs from Mondo. Over here, I've got all the novelizations from the movies. And of course, here is my Michael Myers hot toy figure. I'm a huge fan. All these are John Carpenter prints on the wall that I had signed by him at various points. I'm a tremendous John Carpenter fan, and I think he, more than any comic book, is probably the biggest influence on my life. As a musician, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, his films always create a sense of atmosphere. And it feels like you could turn that camera in any direction and the world would just be expansive and keep going and keep going. I also think his music creates its own tone and feel to a book. So when I'm writing, I'm always listening to horror soundtracks, John Carpenter or Bernard Herrmann or Ennio Morricone. And to me, that helps inspire the story. Whereas if I'm listening to music with words, then I'm just going to write those words. So yeah, no, I love horror. I love what horror can do for you. I love a very specific kind of horror, more psychological. I think the evil within all of us is more interesting than like an unstoppable killing machine that's just going to chop you to bits. Right. So like the torture porn genre, I've never seen a Saw movie. That just doesn't think it would appeal to me. Hostel doesn't really. I don't think that would appeal to me. Knowing that you and I could be pushed to do something awful is more interesting to me. The evil within us all.
Off the cuff question. I'm sorry. I know you said you have John Carpenter's, movie posters in the background. You mentioned something about John Carpenter. I'm sorry. Did you get any of them signed by him? Or
yeah, I did. He was on tour. So that one over there, it's the Mondo variant. I had that one signed, and I had the Thing poster up here. I'll turn the camera up there, signed by him. And then a little Halloween poster signed by him. He was on tour, and then I bought the VIP package so I could talk to him for 15 seconds. I'm sure it was the best 15 seconds of his life. And I put the posters down, and I tell him how wonderful he is and how much big influence he is. And he says, "Thanks, kid," signs the posters, and off I go. He likes to talk about basketball. He likes college basketball, and I don't know enough about college basketball to strike a conversation with him. So I've seen him in concert twice, and both times I did the VIP thing so I could put stuff in front of him to sign. But to me, it's just like there are very few living legends, and he is one of them, right? So it would be like maybe Stan Lee, Iggy Pop, and John Carpenter. So yeah, and I saw those movies at the right age. I was young. I was terrified of Michael Myers. I thought he was outside the door. I thought he was behind the shower curtain. Just that prime evil. And that he doesn't talk and that he's featureless, you imprint your fear onto that. If Michael Myers showed up and said, "Hey, kid, I'm going to get you," you'd be like, well, I know people like that. It's the unknown that terrifies a lot of us.
The other thing I have to say, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off the cuff here, but
please.
The thing I love about the original Halloween movie, there was really no gory violence. I mean, it's rated R, and you see the killings. But there's really no gore. The other thing too was, like you said, Michael Myers is a shapeless thing, because I still remember the scene where, in the kitchen, where he picks up one of the guys, stabs him, and then he looks and he tilts his head like a little kid, like he's looking at it like a kid being curious. And I was like, oh my God, what? He's
almost like studying like a bug, like studying like a piece of art or. Yeah, that little head tilt tells you so much about him without saying anything. Like it's just words would be redundant. And it's scary because he's not ashamed of what he's done.
Mm-hmm.
He's interested. Like, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
In the very first one, he's very into arts and crafts. He steals the tombstone and puts it in there and recreates this little tableau. Yeah, he's got great time management skills. When you're not looking, he's really putting things together.
But he in the mental institution, all those arts and crafts did pay off.
Yeah. But in that first one, especially, he has a dark sense of humor.
Yes.
Like he's setting bodies up to fall down. He wants to see you scared. He's fucking with you. When he puts that sheet over and comes in and talks to Linda, he doesn't need to do that. He wants to do it because he thinks it's funny. And after that, like in Halloween 2, then he becomes a Terminator, right? He's just stoically, it's a different actor playing him, it's Dick Warlock. And he's just like walking through glass doors. And he's still this unrelenting like shark.
Yeah.
But he's missing that boyish mirth
mm-hmm.
that he had in the first one. And I felt like in the 2018 one, they do bring that back a little bit. He's doing more arts and crafts again. And right. It's just not it's not enough to kill you. You want to see someone be scared. You want to play with your food.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Look, it's a lot of work killing people. If you don't enjoy it, why do it?
Yeah.
If it doesn't bring you joy, there's other things he could do.
All right. So now I know on your website, I saw that you would love to write a sequel to Halloween 3. We know John Carpenter, correct me if I'm wrong, Deborah Hill and John Carpenter produced Halloween 3. John Carpenter didn't direct it. I can't remember if he wrote it or co-wrote it.
He did not write it. There was a couple different writers in there. I want to say Richard Matheson from I Am Legend was the original writer.
Okay.
And they didn't go with his take, but he was involved. It's Tommy, I think it's Tommy Lee something. I forget the director's name, I'm sorry. But the director of Halloween 3 is the gentleman who made the mask in the first one. He's part of John Carpenter's crew. So he designed that Halloween mask. I think if I could change one thing about Halloween 3, I'd tell you where they went wrong with Halloween 3. If they had made one slight change, that movie would be canon and it would be celebrated and it would have been a hit.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't take place in a separate universe, so in Halloween 3, they're watching the Halloween movie on screen. Had they not done that and instead had that factory making the Halloween mask,
yes, mm-hmm.
in addition to the other ones, it would have been a huge hit. Because in the Halloween universe, in that very first Halloween, that's just a mask that a company sells that Michael Myers pulls off the shelf.
Yes.
Ostensibly, that's a popular mask that people want to wear.
Mm-hmm.
Where did it come from? What is it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So show us the factory making that mask and tie it in.
Oh my God.
That's all. That little tweak, I think, would have helped tremendously. But when you say this is not of the same world, and Halloween is just a movie here, I think that's the same mistake that Blair Witch 2 made.
Mm-hmm.
The second Blair Witch was like, oh, Blair Witch was just a movie. This is the real world. It's like, well, none of it's the real world. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
We were invested in that first world. We were invested in Haddonfield. Just show me another Halloween in that world. And maybe you see a TV interview with Jamie Lee Curtis being like, yeah, I can't believe I survived all that.
Yeah.
Or it's been years since the Myers murder. He was burned up. So I think there's an opportunity to extend that story world from Halloween 3. I hate that universe has gone untouched. I want to know what happened when he makes those phone calls, because that ending is fantastic. Even though it's somewhat similar to other endings, they did rip off a lot in that Halloween 3. There is a whole sequence where they just like replace her with a robot. Yeah. Spoilers for a 40-year-old movie. Yeah. But why would they even do that if they thought they won? And then it begs questions like, if they have killer robots, why are they even doing the microchip Stonehenge mask commercial plot that has so many points of failure? Yeah. But I think you could pick up 40 years later. You've got crazy Tom Atkins in a nut house. And maybe he actually did stop the plan. Maybe all the TV stations did turn it off. Yeah. And now they're going to try again. But this time, because in the 80s, it was computers, and computers are going to kill us. Yeah. Right? Computers are going to be the end of us. Yeah. So what is it now? Apps. Yeah. You do like the Silver Shamrock app So now you don't have to worry about time zones or TV commercials or these convoluted schemes. And they could be trying again. And then you have Tom Atkins, you make it a requel, you know, someone's going to stop it. They talk to Tom Atkins. The killer robots finally get Tom Atkins.
Yeah.
And then how do we stop technology from killing us all? What I love about Halloween 3 is that it is so all over the map in terms of tonality, of plot motivation, and it's so of the time that I think you just need to be like, what is technology today? Because really what they're saying is TV is evil. Commercialism is evil. Don't watch TV. It's going to rot your brain. A kid's brain literally rots.
Yes.
And snakes and bugs pop out. And it's horrific. And it's in the middle of this like campy kind of TV movie of the week story.
Yes.
So what is it today that we're terrified of? What are the kids today? What's the evil today? It's apps, it's the phone. Tell a story of that world. And the Silver Shamrock Company could have just morphed into something else, right? I think you call it Season of the Warlock.
Yeah.
Because if you have a male witch, that's a warlock.
Yeah.
And honestly enough, funnily enough, I was at a Halloween event a couple years ago, and I met the producer of Halloween, Alik Makad. His father was Mustafa Akkad was the original producer.
Yes.
And had the rights. So I met Alik, his son, and I briefly talked to him. I'm like, I make comic books. I love the Halloween thing. And I think the Halloween 3 universe is gone. It's just been underutilized. I think there's an audience for that.
Yes.
And they had a rough time with the Halloween license in the past, stuff not being paid. So they had some bad experiences with the Halloween world. And I actually have some of the original art from those Halloween comic books. But I pitched him on the Halloween 3 requel, and he said, send me a pitch and I'll look at it. It's possible. Yeah. But I think I don't personally have the funds to license that myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that would be an appropriate thing to do through a Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter is more about personal vision. And I think anytime you involve other entities and companies, it becomes something else. I'm not crazy when I see publishers use Kickstarter to get things funded, because then I'm competing with the publisher. And that's why I'm on Kickstarter, because I don't want to compete with the publisher. But I do think there's a way to do it. And I think I want to do it while Tom Atkins is still alive. Because I think that's critical to get his involvement, because he is his personality looms so large in that Halloween 3.
Yes.
And he's his character, he's like an alcoholic doctor who takes it upon himself to be a detective, who's then a father figure to a girl who's looking for her missing father, but then just decides to sleep with her a bunch.
Yeah.
And a really graphic, bizarre sex scene in a hotel. So yeah, I think he is Halloween 3. That movie is not the same thing without him. If you would cast like a really handsome, dashing leading man, it wouldn't have the staying power of what the hell is going on here? Why this guy? Why are women throwing themselves at this guy? Everywhere he goes, women are like, "Are you gonna call me?" I'm like, "Him? What is happening?" But it's also got a great soundtrack and a great mood, and that town in California, all of it, it just looks beautiful. Dean Cundy, the photographer on there, it looks great. The soundtrack is great, but tonally, it's all over the map. And story-wise, it's riddled with plot holes, to the point where you're like, I don't even care that there's no time zones in the country.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care that the factory is still making masks the night they're about to kill a third of the world population, as if anyone's going to want to buy their mask the next day. I think if you're killing half the world, your stock is going to plummet. But just the grandiose villainry of it all, I just love it.
Oh yes. Because
so my only complaint is, if I could go back in time, I would tie it into that world more.
Oh yeah.
I would tie it into the first 2 movies.
Yeah. And I have to say, it's one of my favorite sequels, because it was so different.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Because for some weird reason, like you said, it's all over the place. It's not a horror movie. It's a horror movie, but then it's like, wait a minute. Well, why are we having computers? Well, why does this look like Stonehenge? Why does this, and wait, we have a killer robot.
Yeah, you have killer androids. Just stick with that. You want to kill the world? Send out killer androids. Why are you doing this bug thing?
But yeah,
you would have to be on cocaine to write that story. You would. Like, that's just like in the 80s, people loved cocaine.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that is a movie. They don't make sequels like that anymore.
Oh yeah.
Which is why I think you could do it as a graphic novel, because there's a lot less financial writing on it. You don't have to have it be elevated horror if you do it as a graphic novel.
Mhm.
Tommy Lee Wallace, that's the director of Halloween 3. And
Okay.
he's also the creator of the Halloween mask,
all right.
of the white mask.
All right.
And I'm not calling Tommy Lee Edwards a cokehead, but I'm saying somebody involved in that script production did drugs.
Yeah, because
That's all.
yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
What was your favorite convention moment, either as a fan or as a creator? Whether it was a comic book convention or even a horror convention.
Okay, I have an anecdote, and it's going to make me look like an idiot, but it was really, really important that I had this experience. I would say it's 20 years ago, and I was doing the Less Than Hero miniseries, which is about like sort of a scuzz rock superhero in San Francisco at that time, who was sort of foul-mouthed and full of himself and egotistical. And it was like, there's a lot of potty humor in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was like a mix of lowbrow, highbrow. And I would do the pitch. I was at a convention. I would pitch everybody who walked by. And I forget what my pitch was exactly, but I'm trying to sell something that I don't think is going to appeal to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And a woman was coming down the hall, the aisle with two of her kids, and I remember she was Indian, and she was dressed really well. Like, she was clearly in a different tax bracket than I was, and she just looked beautiful. And I was like, I can't give her the pitch for my dumb book.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is just going to offend her,
Yeah.
and I don't want to embarrass her in front of her kids. I'm just going to let her walk by without giving her the pitch. I'm going to do her that dignity.
Mm-hmm.
So she stopped at my table, and she's like, "Oh, when does issue 4 come out?" And then she started telling me about my book, and she had been reading my book, and she knew my book.
Wow.
Yeah, she bought it at a bookstore. And I just remember thinking, like, I am such an idiot that I was editorializing who I thought would like my book.
Mm-hmm.
I made a value judgment, like, oh, she wouldn't like this. No, she did. She knew it. And that was a really valuable lesson for me to stop. My audience is not going to look like me. Yeah. My audience is going to be everybody. So I'll pitch everybody, and then you decide if it's for you or not.
Yes.
That was really important. That was really like, I was like, I'm such an idiot. Why did I think that? Why did I make that assumption? So that was 20 years ago. So since then, I just tell everyone about the book, and like, hey, if you like it, awesome. If not, maybe you like the next one, or maybe you like Saga. Go buy Saga. Saga's great. Yeah. If you read it, Hellboy's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it doesn't offend me if someone doesn't like my book, because I have a very specific voice, and if you're not looking for that voice this week, that's okay.
Yeah.
My buddy Jeff Parker does great books.
Mm-hmm.
Buy one of his. So once I realized I had my own voice and perspective, I stopped being competitive, and I stopped editorializing. And if you like it, awesome. If not, it doesn't hurt my feelings. You like what you like.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say also too, but it's kind of a nice surprise that she came up to you.
Yeah, you never know who's reading your work. Don't assume. We all like different things. And it might surprise you what I like. Probably not, but
yeah,
you never know.
All right, 2 more questions.
Hit me.
Have you and your family been to Hawaii?
I don't have kids, but I do have a wife.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I were in Oahu, I want to say, in like around 2010, 2011. And we went on the vacation, and we had the talk. Are we going to get married? Is that something we want to do? We were coming up on 2 years, and I think at that point you should stop wasting someone's time. 2 years is a big chunk of time. You get to know somebody. But I also don't believe you should jump out of a bush with an engagement ring. Yeah. This is the biggest decision of your life, is whether or not you're going to get married. And it deserves some consideration. So we went on this trip, and we spent the whole time talking. What would our lives look like if we were married? Do you want kids? Do I want kids? How are we going to handle finances? Are we ready to make that commitment? Are we the right people for that commitment? And it's a long discussion. And spoiler alert, we got married. I came back. I said, okay, in Oahu, we went through all the stages, what our lives could look like. I'm like, all right, give me the measurements of your ring finger at the end. I ordered a ring, and then a couple months later, we were back in San Francisco, and we had a lunch date. She took a break at lunch. I took a break at lunch. We went to the park. I gave her the ring. She said, "Cool, now we're engaged."
Nice.
But we did all the deliberating, all the discussions, the deliberations were done in Oahu. And then I want to say, like around 2001, I was on the Big Island.
Yes.
With I had my girlfriend at that time was Hawaiian. I went back to Hawaii. I met her family.
Oh,
they did not love me.
Um.
I was a bit more unpolished
Okay.
in 2021. As rough as I am now, I was a little bit more, a rough gem.
Yes. Yeah, right.
But it's beautiful, beautiful place. But also, I am very, very pale. I can get a sunburn from the moon. So I'm not the type of person who's going to lay out on a beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love getting up early and going for a swim, and then going for a swim at night. The midday, I'm covered head to toe under an umbrella, wearing a burqa, whatever I can do to stave off the sun.
All right. Last question. Any closing words to our listeners?
If you've made it this far, thank you so much for your time and energy. You're obviously a diehard comics fan, as Jason and I are as well. So thank you for listening and giving me your ear. And I hope you check out Past Tense. And it would make a great gift for someone you don't like.
All right.
And thank you, Jason, for your time and energy and reading the book and having such thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we did this.
Yes, I'm glad. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you. Thank you very much.
Of course.
I wish you all the success with Past Tense. If you are a new comic book reader or a lifelong comic book reader, please check out Past Tense. It is an original graphic novel from Dark Horse Comics coming out on June 21st. As I've mentioned, I love this story because it's a great sci-fi crime story that unfolds very naturally, and it's a great story. It really is.
That means so much to hear that. That really warms my heart. Thank you.
And
I appreciate that so much.
And I love the character of Ashley. She's very good. She's that everyday person. We go to work. We have, we're college graduates with, most of us are college graduates with useless, degrees, but we have a job. We get a job, and we just survive through the day, basically, so it's very good. And Jason, I'm being very serious to the listeners. Listeners, if you guys get a chance, not only pick up a copy for yourself, but pick up a copy who you think your comic book friend who loves sci-fi and crime stories. Give them a copy of this book. It's very good. And it'll make a nice
what would also help is if you tell your local retailer that if you order a copy from your retailer, they're likely to order a copy for you and then one for the shelf, because they might not even know it exists. Because, I'm sure Marvel's got an event this summer. DC probably has super duper darkest Final Crisis coming out. So, you're competing with these. So if you tell your retailer that you're interested in this book, they will buy a copy for the shelf as well and turn it on to someone else. So you're almost buying two copies, at least, if you tell it from a retailer.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Jason. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Drew, the host of Comics for Fun and Profit, for putting this episode together. Drew, thank you very much for all your hard work behind the scenes. And if you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys, aloha.
This episode of Comics for Fun and Profit is brought to you by Threadless. More importantly, the Comics Fun Profit shop on Threadless at comicsfunprofit.threadless.com, where you can find about half a dozen different designs, plenty of Comics for Fun and Profit themed merch. If you just want a t-shirt, you're good, and if you want sweatshirts or other swaggy items, and you can get anything. Phone cases, shower curtains, it runs the gamut. Skateboards, I think. So check that out. We've already sold several. We're excited about the fact that the folks that want to support us in this way are able to and wear our merch out in the real world. That's pretty exciting stuff. So get your Comics for Fun and Profit branded items at comicsfunprofit.threadless.com.